Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to another Fabric Power BI Portugal meetup. My name is Pedro Reis and I will be one of your hosts. And I'm here with Rui. Hello, Rui.
Hello, hi everyone.
So the two of us here, we have a special guest. We have Jon Vogue. I will not try to pronounce the middle name, but Jon will tell us exactly how it is. Jon comes from Copenhagen, and he will share with us something very exciting because the hype has been a lot on AI, has been a lot on Fabric, and Power Platform is still something very relevant and very important and facilitates the integration on the everyday. And I think this topic might be very interesting for you. So, hello, Jon.
Hi, good to see you all.
Good to have you here, Jon. Thanks for accepting our invitation. You know that your session, we did we did a call for speakers. We received your session, one of them, I think even maybe more than one, if I will remember. And we had like a poll. Our user group voted the topics they found more interesting, and your session was one of the more interesting ones. So clearly, we have a lot of people interested in getting to know you and your session on it. So, Jon, I will stop by screen sharing, and I will ask you also to introduce yourself to the user group, and from there also we'll kick off. And Rui will be here also to moderate with some questions from the audience. So, guys, if you during the audience if you have any questions, feel free to shoot. Otherwise, we'll also have some of our own according to the session to prepare. So, Jon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to the user group?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, Pedro and Rui, and awesome to hear that the topic is interesting to you guys. Very briefly about myself, I'll just pull up a slide on the screen as well. My name is Jon, and the middle name Stjernegård is a very traditional Danish name that nobody can pronounce, so I won't spend more time on that. But I'm a senior consultant with Inspire, a Danish-based data consultancy, and personally, I love working in the intersection between Fabric, Power BI, and the Power Platform, in the sense that what I get the most joy out of is to empower users to get the most out of their data. And that to me not only means displaying data in a report, but also letting them interact with that data in the most meaningful way. And that's where the inspiration for this session came from. It was out of I think originally the first extension that I built in Power Apps for Power BI back in the day was a simple comment integration, which I think is where a lot of people start with Power Apps for Power BI. The comment functionality in Power BI is not very great, but with a few hours and Power Apps, you can build something that is responsive to filters you apply in Power BI and that saves data to your backend and all kinds of cool stuff. And that has kind of exploded into me building all kinds of extensions for Power BI and Fabric now with the Power Platform. Today, the focus will be mostly on Power Apps and how we can use those to build integrations, rather embedded apps inside of the reports. I'll show them in just a second. But you could also build many cool integrations with Power Automate, and I might just mention a few of them during the course of the session. The plan is to show you guys three different, let me put this in full screen. The goal is to show you guys first a demo of sort of the final solution, the Power Apps that I have embedded into a Power BI report to kind of showcase different tiers of extension functionality, and then also show you how each of these integrations were built, so you can hopefully be inspired to go and try this yourself, because frankly, it's not that difficult to get started with this. Power Platform is a low-code platform. So if you're already familiar with working with Power BI and DAX, well, then you're better at coding than you need to be to build Power Apps. So of course, there are small differences, but that's kind of the barrier of entry. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I hope you'll use the chat, and then Rui, please just speak up if there are questions. I only have one screen, so just let me know if there are questions along the way. I'll make sure to pause every once in a while, and otherwise there'll also be time for questions at the end in case there are some that we haven't had time for yet.
And Jon, the three cases you mentioned here really seem very interesting. So we're excited to see how will show us about it. Yeah.
So let me go ahead and actually start off by showing you what we can do with Power Apps extensions in Power BI. So I've learned from experience that I'll need to refresh my report here. I built a simple Power BI report here on top of a Fabric data warehouse, and I made the mistake of letting a data flow append millions and millions and millions of rows of my data to my data warehouse over the weekend. So it's a little slow today, it seems, but it loaded pretty fast anyway. This is just demo data, a Contoso data set in a Fabric data warehouse that you see on the left-hand side. And then everything on the right-hand side, that's where the Power Apps magic happens. And I've created here 3 different Power Apps extensions. Usually you probably wouldn't see 3 in a report, but I put them all together here so we can talk about them and play with them together. So the first app that you see here is, I call it an annotation app here, but really it's similar to what I was describing just before, a comment app. So the comment functionality in Power Apps is notoriously bad, right? It does not understand if you are filtering on anything in the report, but in our report here, I can pass filters from Power BI to my app and basically let the app filter its data based on the data coming from Power BI. So it acts really as a separate data source, which is really cool. I'll show exactly how it's done in a second. But first, just a demonstration of the functionality. If I drill down here, hopefully my report will play nice. Drill down into the data here and select the data point that I was working on earlier. You can see here. Now, when I'm selecting Chloe test@email.com, the comment that I wrote earlier for Chloe will show up in my comment app. And this is a comment that's stored on the granularity that I've defined in the Power App. So I've defined here to get the year that I've selected in the report, get the country that I drilled into, the product that I drilled into, and then the email of the person I selected. So if I choose Haley's email here, we'll see that the email in the Power App will change to Haley, and I could add a new comment and submit that. And this is now written to a separate table in Dataverse, in this case, that is being displayed live with direct query in my Power BI report. And now I can, go back and forth between Chloe and Haley, and I can see those comments, and they are only accessible when I click on that data point. And the use case for that is often, say, a financial report in which you both have executives or management, and then you have maybe analysts in the same report. And this would enable analysts to comment on the result and explain or document why are the changes in our sales as they are, and management would be able to read the comments from the analyst while getting their KPIs. That would be just one use case, but it could also be all kinds of other comment functionality that you can imagine in a report, right? So that's the first app that I'm going to show you how to build today. Before we get to that, just a quick demo of the others. The second one here is a master data management app. So in this case, the comment case here, I'm writing data to a separate table, a table that only the Power App is using. But what I wanted to show is that I can also do write back to a data source that is being used in the rest of the Power BI report. This could be any data source. It could be a regular Azure SQL table, but in this case, I'm actually writing directly to the Microsoft Fabric warehouse. That took a little bit of time to figure out exactly how. It behaves a little different than normal SQL servers, but I'll show you how to do that as well. And you can see here I actually already changed Chloe's old email to something like this earlier today, and I could let me try and do something similar for Kayla's email here. If my report would update. Sometimes it gets a little slow when you have this much data in it. I was hoping it was going to load a little faster. Let's see. Just give it a second. Or if I get really impatient, I might refresh the report. Let's just try that. But the idea with the integration is that I can click on a data point in my report here, for example, an email, and I can write which value would I like to overwrite the existing value with, so that I could update, say, a customer email in my customer dimension table in the data warehouse. And now I don't know why my Fabric data warehouse decided to go all blank on me. Usually this will fix itself within 30 seconds, but let's see how that goes. The idea with the whole integration, the use case is not necessarily only master data management. I think a valid critique of doing this in a Power BI report is like, well, why would I want people in my Power BI report to update dimension values? That sounds completely crazy. Like, why would I ever want to change the email of a customer from inside a Power BI report? And I think that is a valid critique. I probably wouldn't do that either myself. This is mostly to showcase the feature. What I think is a more apparent use case now, I'm just gonna show you that now that it finally works. Kayla's new email at email.com. If I click this without clicking other buttons, hopefully Kayla's email out here will in a second be changed to Kayla's new email. There we have it, Kayla's new email, and that's data being updated live in the Fabric data warehouse. And I'm using Direct Lake to query that data in live. So I think that's really cool. And the use case that I mostly tell people that I think this works best for is say something like a scenario engine or forecasting engine inside of Power BI. So let's say you have a Power BI report with a lot of data modeling logic, DAX logic that allows you to compare sales values to a budget value or to a forecast value. You could put in a Power App extension that writes budget or forecast values directly into a table in the data warehouse, which is then being picked up by your DAX measures in your data model and being compared against your actual values. So something like a budget scenario engine is something that I think this live write back to the database itself is really, really useful for.
Jon, that's the point. I think it's even more interesting because usually you can, it's already common to do that right back, but like to another separate storage,
Sure.
and you are actually writing to the warehouse source, which I think it's actually interesting because it's a different use case than writing the granularity that is filtered,
Yes.
but to another place, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And what I'll show when I show this app in particular is that for specifically Fabric, this one does require the use of Power Automate to actually work. But I'll get into the details of why that is necessary for Fabric data warehouses in a second. Also, one note for this is that when we're talking Fabric, the live write back to Fabric will only work on data warehouses and not data lakehouses. And that's because the API endpoint, the SQL endpoint of the lakehouse is only read, whereas the data warehouse has read and write properties. And that would be the same as if you opened it in SQL Server Management Studio. You could write new data to a warehouse, but you could not do that to the lakehouse. The final app that I will show you how to create today is a OpenAI ChatGPT extension. And now Faith would have it so that I ran out of API tokens this morning. So I was about to try and demo it. What is the Power BI user group Portugal, and it would hopefully have been able to give me a response. But now I'll probably get an error saying that I ran out of tokens or something like that. But I will still show you how it's built. Using the OpenAI integration. Yeah, you see, I get like, you exceeded your current quota. So that's what happens when you do live demos sometimes. I need to upgrade my account, it seems. Anyway, those are the 3 extensions that I want to show you today, how you can build. And because we have to show 3 different ones, you know, the level of detail will be where I'll show you all the different components. I'll show you all the code, but I will not be building it all live. That would simply take more than 45 minutes. But without further ado, let's jump into to the first app here. So the first thing you need to know when you're building Power App extensions for Power BI is that the best way to do this is actually to do it in the browser. And that has to do with how the integration works between Power BI and Power Apps, in the sense that if you create or open a Power App from inside of Power BI, you will actually be able to see the data from your Power BI report inside of Power Apps in another tab. So now I already, if I were to create a new Power App from scratch, I could click this Power Apps for Power BI visualization. And the idea is that you will now have to, just like any other Power BI visual, add 1 or more data fields to this. You can add measures, you can add dimensions, you can add anything you want. And as soon as you start adding those, it will tell you to create a new app or open an existing one. And we could create one from scratch if we wanted to, and we would get a blank canvas. But today I'm just going to show you the ones that I've already built. So, but create new would do the same as opening an existing app. And the idea is when I open this existing app, here I do it in edit mode. In a second, it will open a new tab. Okay, go back to the report here. And this has now established a link between my Power BI report and the Power App. I didn't do anything else besides opening the app from inside of Power BI. And that's a little easier to do when you're in the browser rather than when you are on Power BI desktop. But now let's see this open. You can see it's actually still filtered here. It still has the values 2020, Canada, the product here, etc., which was what I had filtered on in here in my Power BI report. And this is happening because of this Power BI integration element in Power Apps, which is automatically being created whenever you open a Power App from inside of Power BI. And this one acts as a full data source in Power Apps that you can use and work with inside of Power Apps. And it contains all of the selected data in your Power BI report. Now, I know that not all of you know a lot about Power Apps, so allow me to introduce Power Apps just very briefly here with a small tour. This is the Canvas Power Apps Designer, in which we can build new Power Apps. Power Apps are built in a tree structure where you define a number of screens. A screen will then have a number of controls. That would be all of those different elements, and they are just added via drag and drop from these graphical user interface menus. And then each of these controls, you can add formulas to those. And for example, in this case, when I have a data source here called Power BI integration, it could also have been any other data source. Those you would add from in this data pane. But in this case, most of my data is coming from Power BI integration, from the Power BI report. And if I wanted to display that data, I could simply here create this is a label control. So you could go to insert and add a new text label here. And on here, I could define a formula, low-code formula, because it's very declarative. It's very easy to sort of wrap your head around. And I could say, well, I want to get the first item coming from Power BI integration.data. Oh, like that. Data. And I want to get the product name. And then now this returns the product name that is being filtered in Power BI. If I have not selected anything in Power BI, it will just return the first item on the list in alphabetical order. But when I am filtering actively, it will return the first item that I have selected. And that's what I'm doing for each of these labels here, so that the user can see what is the current selected year, and the country, the product, and the email that I have selected in the report. And the reason for that is because in this case, I want to store annotations or comments for a specific salesperson's or customer. In this case, I guess it actually is for a specific customer, product, country, and year. I want to store a comment in an underlying Dataverse table. Could have been a SQL table, could also have been in Fabric, could have been anywhere, but in this case, it's a Dataverse table. So I'm using these labels to just hard code in year, country, product, email, and these secondary labels to return the first year in my Power BI integration.data. If I wanted to preview all of the data that's coming from Power BI, I could click this little button, and now I can see all the different values that are coming in. These values, they mirror all the fields that I've put in to my Power Apps visualization over here. So I can see product name, email, country name, 3 measures, and year. And those would be the same values that are accessible to me through the data connector inside of Power Apps. That is what makes it possible for us to filter a Power App based on what we select in Power BI. And now all that's really left for us to do inside of this comment app is to create a simple text input. I have then changed the default value of the text input to look up if there already is a comment stored on the same year, country, email, and product name. I'm here using the Power Apps equivalent of a CTE, if any of you are proficient in SQL, to, well, first I simply store the first year, country name, address, product name in variables, and then I do a lookup to my Dataverse table to say, well, display the comment in there if there is any. In this case, there was no comment for Kayla, and nothing is shown then. If I selected Haley or Chloe, as I showed you before, that's how I could automatically display the comments from those people. Now, the only thing left to do here is then to create a button that takes the text that I write here and submits that to the Dataverse table. So I've put in a button. I've just dragged and dropped it in, and then you need to configure its onSelect property. What will happen when the user selects said button? Well, in this case, what I'm doing is first, I set a variable called show spinner. That's technically not necessary, but that's because I wanted to display like a loading spinner while it's doing its thing, but we can ignore that for a second. Then I'm again using a CTE to load in a couple of variables so I can reference those in my statement. And then I use a patch formula to write my item or my comment to my test table comments in Dataverse. And I make clever use of another formula, and this is where Power Apps sort of, you could do this in a simple or a clever way. I've done this in a clever way in the sense that I, with one statement, can either update or create new comments, but less experienced Power Apps developers could achieve the same in a little bit of a simpler setup using a form or using a simpler version of this code. But all you need to know here is that I'm writing a patch statement. Essentially, it's an update statement, really, in SQL terms, where I'm saying, look up if there's already a record and overwrite that if that's the case with these values that you see down here, the year, country, email, product name, and comment that I initiated in my CTE. So that's it. I have one screen here with about 12 different controls, most of them being simple label controls in a Power App. And this gives me all the comment functionality that I want in my Power BI report. And of course, you could make this more complex. You could have multiple comments in one app. You could alter the layout of this app to be much taller, right? So you had room for adding multiple things. I just made it like this so that it would fit inside of my report here. One last thing then, let's imagine that, okay, I created my app. I have saved and published my app. Because I am developing in the browser, please make sure to remember to save your report in here, because otherwise you will have to reopen your report in edit mode and re-add all of the Power Apps visualizations and the dimensions and measures, etc., to the visual and point it to the right app, etc., etc. Please do remember to save the report and then again download the PBIX file afterwards and version it wherever you are versioning your Power BI files, right? So normally I wouldn't encourage people to edit Power BI reports in the service, but it really is the best way to do it when you're working with Power Apps because you get this live integration. If I had opened this Power App from inside Power BI Desktop, these values here would show blank because it does not know the link between Power BI Desktop and my browser. This only works if I've opened the app from inside the Power BI service, so I have them in two tabs next to each other. So that is actually the first extension that I wanted to show you, and I wanted to make sure to address any questions if anybody have any for this comment app here.
Yes, John, we have a question here regarding the source of data. It needs to be in Dataverse or it could be in SharePoint list or other tabular data source?
Great question. The choice of data source is really important. In this case, you could use any data source you want and still have the comments show up live because the Power App will always have a direct query connection to Dataverse, to SQL, to SharePoint, to anything. Power Apps can only ever be direct queries. So as long as the data that I'm creating here also only needs to be displayed inside of the same visualization, then I can use any data source, at least from a sort of technical standpoint. Then there is a security discussion that is, where is it smart to put my data here? If you have any sensitive data, then I would never recommend SharePoint. And the reason for that being that it's really, really hard to completely secure and lock down SharePoint lists so that nobody else can see data that they're not supposed to. It's technically possible, but it's really difficult to do. It's much easier to control security by using either Dataverse or SQL or a Fabric data warehouse. Now, for this next demo that I'll show you, this one would not work with SharePoint. And the reason for that is...
prior to before you go to the
Sure.
next case, there are another question regarding licensing method.
Yeah.
To use this kind of stuff, we need to have the question is to be a Dataverse table. Can I leverage Dataverse table in Microsoft Teams app, or does it have to be a model-driven app in Power Apps, which needs a premium license?
In this case, for the app here at the top, if it's built using SharePoint list as the foundation, it will not require any more than the standard Power Apps license, which is included in most Office license packages these days. If you're using Dataverse, and I think even Dataverse for Teams, I think you will need a premium license, yes. And if you use SQL Server for the data source, then it's also a premium license. Only if you use SharePoint would it be free to use the Power App.
Okay, that's fine.
Any other questions before I move on?
No, I can. You can move on.
Yeah. So for the next Power App, for this one, it actually does really matter which data source we select, because for this one, we want the data we create to show up live inside of the report. And that means that the Power BI report needs to have either direct query or direct link to the underlying data source. And that is not possible in Power BI to do to a SharePoint list. So this second app would not work with SharePoint as a data foundation. This would only work with any data source that supports direct query or direct link in Power BI. So Dataverse works, Azure SQL works, Fabric works, and there are many more, right? But that was just to preface that discussion. And then again, to show you how it's built, I will open this up in edit mode. You can see again, I'm passing a lot of values from my Power BI report to the app. Let's open this up so we can see how it's built. And some of the techniques used in this second app is very similar to what we did in the first app. You'll notice that there are a lot of references to this Power BI integration element again, because once again, we want to be able to display the currently selected value to the user to give them, a proper user experience so they know which value they are changing, etc. But this app, again, on its surface is really simple. I have one screen with something like 10 different controls here, different labels, different drop downs, and a button as well. So again, the first things I've done is just put in a couple of labels with just hard-coded text values. And then I've created these 3 fields. The first one is a drop-down. This drop-down allows the user to select between country, product name, and email so that they can select which data in this master data setup they want to change. So if they've selected email, the value that is being displayed in old value will be the email that they selected. If they choose country, it will be a country. And if they choose product name, it will be the product. And the way this works is that this dropdown, it just has hard-coded values for the 3 different options. This is the way you can hard-code items in a dropdown, but I could also have pointed this to a table in a SQL database. And then this value right here is a text input that I have disabled. There's a property called display mode in Power Apps, which you can set to disabled if you don't want the user to be able to interact with it. And then I've set the default value of this text input to switch based on the selected value in the dropdown. So if the user has selected email, then I want to return the first Power BI integration.data.email address. So again, we can have a look at the data that's underneath. So if email was selected, then return the email address. If product name was selected, return the product name. And if country was selected, return the region country name. Then this final text input here, there's no default there because I always want the user to input the value that they should use to override the existing one, right? So the behavior of the user will be that Kayla's new email at email.pt, right? That could be Kayla's, maybe I wanted to change that value in the database. And now the real difficulty of this app comes in, again, creating this value in the database. So the first thing I tried, well, if you want to do this with a SQL database or Dataverse, it works exactly as in the first example I showed you. You have to create like a patch formula, and that will do the magic for you. And when I first tried to get this to work with Fabric, I came across a strange error. So you can see here, this essentially would be enough to overwrite the email value with the new email that I'm putting in. But I got this weird error that says this data source is either read-only or has no primary key. And that's because in Fabric data warehouses, you cannot put enforced primary keys on any table. And that means that Power Apps is not able to write data directly to Fabric data warehouses. If this has been a regular SQL server, it would be no problem. I could just put a primary key on the table in the SQL server. But in Fabric, it's not possible. So instead, what we have to do is that we have to get the help of Power Automate. And the way we do that is instead that I have added a Power Automate flow. Oh, I've added a Power Automate flow here. You can easily integrate Power Automate flows into Power Apps like this. And Power Automate, for those who don't know, is a cloud automation tool that allows you to run a series of cloud-related processes based on different triggers. So a trigger could be scheduled every day at 8 o'clock, run this flow. A trigger could be event-driven. When a new item is created in this SQL table, run this flow. And then the third one that I'm using here is when a flow is manually triggered, meaning in this case, when I click a button in Power Apps, I want the flow to run. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a Power Automate flow here that I say you should be able to pass 4 different values to this Power Automate flow. I want to pass the information about the table that I'm writing to, the column name that I'm writing to, the old value that I need to update, and the new value that I am overriding the old value with. And then I create an action here that's called execute a SQL query. And this one works perfectly fine on a Fabric data warehouse. I'm simply sending an update statement to my Fabric data warehouse using update and then pointing it to the table to write variable that I am getting in up here. Then I'm saying set the column name equal to new value where the column name was equal to old value. So it's really just an update statement, and that works beautifully. The way that you then trigger this from within Power Apps and pass those parameters is that we take our, again, why did that happen? I refresh that, 1 sec. Why did that go? Fabric right back. Not sure why that failed now, but the idea is that you will define the variables that you want to pass to the app. So first, I'm again using a CTE to say, well, I want the table to write to depend on what the user has selected in the dropdown. So if they choose email, then it's the dim customer. But if it's the product name that they are altering, then it's the dim product that becomes the table to write. For column name, again, depending on the dropdown, it should return either region country name, email address, or product name. Old value, simply get whatever value is in this old value text input. And for new value, simply get whatever they wrote into the manual text input. And now because something messed up with my connection here, it throws an error here. I'll just make sure not to save in a second. But then what you do is you simply call the Power Automate flow by saying the name of the flow .run, and then I can pass it those 4 different parameters. And that's how you get those 4 variables into the Power Automate flow so that the update statement can run. And then what I'm doing is that I'm saying, well, okay, the result of this Power Automate flow, you can save that in a variable called var result, and then I could use that to display to the end user whether the update was successful or not. So that's the way that we can go from, well, filtering something in a Power BI report, have it show up inside of a Power App, let it be used as default values in a text input, and pass that value through a button to Power Automate to write that to the data source. And again, the only reason I'm doing Power Automate here is because Fabric is a little weird with the primary keys. Had it been a regular Azure SQL database or Dataverse table, I didn't need the flow at all. I could simply write a patch statement like I did in the first app up here. And that's basically it. That's how you do data write back. Let me just refresh this. It looks all weird now. That's what happens when you enter those apps. It starts being in edit mode. Then they become a little weird. So I guess now's a good time to talk a little about any questions for the write back app, if there are any.
I have one question. Jon, what makes the Power BI site refresh that data after
good question.
After
Good
the
question.
Power Automate finished his work?
I'm really happy you mentioned that, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention that myself, because that's actually the beauty of the integration, right? So when I click this button, the Power BI report automatically, without the user clicking on anything, the Power BI report does a visual refresh. So there is no data set refresh happening, it's a visual refresh. And the way that is triggered is, if we can just have this load, the Power BI integration data source here, it has two different properties. There is both the one that's Power BI integration.data, but there is actually a second one. There is a command, a function that is called Power BI integration.refresh.
Okay.
And if you put this formula inside of your Power App, it will trigger a visual refresh inside of Power BI. And because I'm writing to a Fabric data warehouse, which has direct lake connection to my report, the data will be there when the visual refresh is triggered.
Okay, I understand. Okay,
yeah,
that's fine.
And I guess a last note on that is just that the Power App formulas will run sequentially. So that's how we know for certain that as long as I put this after the whole formula that does the data patch, then I'm sure that the data will be there. Yeah, but really good question. Thank you for asking that. Other questions related to this write back extension?
No, so far none.
Yep, that's totally fine. Then the last one that I wanted to display here, and now of course a little hard for me to demo, but because my API tokens ran out. But really, it's just a chatbot as you know it. It was supposed to show my question here and then the answer on the right, and you could have a whole discussion with OpenAI. And the way that that extension is built, I'll show you here. Again, one screen, 10 controls, something like that. I have a couple of labels here. I have a button to reset it, etc. But really, the magic that happens here is that I'm using a custom connector. So custom connectors in Power Apps is if you want to interact with any API out there, almost any. There are a couple that it won't work with. You can create your own data connector that you can add to your Power App. So when you click add data in a Power App, there are all these different pre-built connectors for everything like Twitter and Teams and Dataverse and Snowflake and SQL Server. But if you find something that isn't already there, you can create your own connector using a custom connector. So I went ahead and did that. I just followed there was a YouTube guide by who was the author? I think it was Robin Rosengrün, a German guy who had created a guide on how to do this, and spent a lot of time setting up the custom connector. And then I realized after like twinkling with this for half a day that he actually published his data connector for anybody to use. So you can even find community connectors inside of Power Apps from in here. So I could just go ahead and search for OpenAI, and there is actually an OpenAI connector as well. And you could use that in your app. So you don't have to build that custom connector like I did. You can just search for OpenAI inside of Power Apps, and you can use one of these pre-built models. And the way it works is that just like I did with the Power Automate flow, you can use this custom connector and use the API connections that is built into that connector as part of your Power App. So here I have a screen. I have a text input where the user can input any text value. And then I have a button here that allows them to submit this value. And what I do is that we have to kind of start from the inside out here. I am calling my OpenAI extension here, ChatGPT extension for Power BI.chat API. And then this one, asks me to provide it with the model that I should use and which message should I send to the OpenAI model. So I'm defining, well, I want to use the GPT 3.5, and then I want this message down here to be passed as the parameter. Now, I've decided to wrap this message inside of a collect statement. Collect in Power Apps allows you to add a row of data to a table in memory in the Power App. And this sort of collect statement, it doesn't really impact the OpenAI connector. I do that so that I can store the message that the user has inputted and display that inside of my gallery. So if I write a question, now I know this is going to fail in a second, right? But the collect statement will work. The reason that this data, what is Power BI, is now showing up inside of my report is because I have now collected that message into call ChatGPT message. So this table now has one row of data where I can see the user submitted a message called what is Power BI. And that collection is then what I'm displaying inside of this gallery. Now, the second part of this is, of course, that we need to get the response from ChatGPT. So I'm taking this whole expression and then I'm saving that inside of a variable called var ChatGPT response. And then I'm saying collect into that same collection called ChatGPT message, take the first message that's coming out of this variable. And unfortunately, I can't demo that because I ran out of tokens, but essentially it just would add another row of data to my collection where what it would say here would be role, it would say agent, I believe, and then content, it would provide me the full answer. And because my gallery is just set up to read all items from that table, I would be able to display all of those messages in one long gallery. And now the little formatting trick that we can use to display this as like a real chat history is that I can use that property of role to determine whether I want to left align or right align all of these items, right? So I could say, okay, well, this profile image, if the role is user, then I want to get the image of the user. And if the role was not user, then return this ChatGPT logo that I have added to the app. And same with the, where do I have the align here? Here you go. If this item.role equals user, then align left, otherwise align right. And that would give you the impression of like a real chat between the user and the agent, the chatbot on the other side. Then I've also created a reset button here, and all that does is clear that collection that I have in memory. So if I clear that, my messages will disappear. And I'm really sorry that I can't show you the final result, but hopefully you can see that it's actually really easy to work with this. And seeing as you don't even need to create that custom connector, well, it's really plug and play. You just add the OpenAI data source and you put that inside of your formula. You say which model do you want to use, and you pass the message that you want to send to the API. And of course, working with APIs is never truly easy, right? You might need to read the documentation to know which available models is available for your subscription. See, now I ran out of tokens, right? Maybe I could use a cheaper model or something like that and still make it work. You need to know what role should it accept. And also, in this case, I did the simplest implementation of this. You could also, there are also versions of this connector in which you can alter the temperament of the bot to have it answer more or less rude to your questions. You can alter all kinds of parameters like you can if you are building your own custom OpenAI based AI model. So lots of possibilities there to make it well more customized if that's what you want. And even if you have like a custom AI model in your organization, if it has an API endpoint, you could create a custom connector to your organization's chatbot. So you could, in your Power BI report, chat with your secure chatbot in your organization. I think that's a really, really cool use case to have that embedded in Power BI as well. Now, maybe Copilot in a while, if that gets hooked up to all of your data, maybe this will be redundant. But until Copilot gets to that stage, I think this is a really, really cool type of extension that we can build.
And John, if I may, for instance, in this example that you mentioned, you have the chat box in order to interact and to ask questions, but you are asking the questions and accessing according to the API that you use a certain version of GPT, and you are using free text. Of course, we could also, like you did in the examples before, pass some of the parameters of the filters of the reports. However, what we could, or maybe store some part of that on a collection, but we don't know what the user is going to prompt and which of the parameters you would call. What are your thoughts on having part of these parameters like in a collection so that the user actually could reference them in a dynamic way? Have you thought also about this use case? What would it be the best way to make that happen?
To be completely honest, I've only thought about passing parameters from Power BI to the app is an excellent idea, right? So say you could make a more, let's call it a more specific ChatGPT extension in which you are limited to asking questions about whatever you've selected in your report, right? So it will know that I'm asking about, maybe if it's sales data that I'm analyzing, maybe it could help me describe if there are any macroeconomical reasons that my sales might be lower in 2020. Who knows? Maybe there was a COVID thing, right? If I'm passing parameters to the Power App, that for sure I've thought about as a huge use case. But what you're asking about is also to sort of pass the dynamic parameters from the Power App to the user, right? Like letting the user know which parameters they can control?
Yeah, so imagine what I'm thinking is something, it will be technically possible also for the user to select a couple of fields. Everything that is selected could be stored like in a collection, and the call of the API could access a part of that information to do the secure internal API call, right?
It would definitely be possible to do. You could definitely do that, and there are multiple ways to implement it, right? You could either have a physical representation of the different parameters and their options in a table, like a dimension table in your data warehouse or in Dataverse or something like that, and you can display that both in your Power BI report and in your app, depending on where you would like your user to interact with those parameters. If you do it in the Power BI report, you could have slicer dropdowns or tables in here in which the user could select the parameters that they want, and then you would use Power BI integration.data inside of Power Apps to get those values. Or you could just make your app a little bigger and create the dropdowns inside of the app, but reading from the same underlying data tables, right? You could even, if you don't want to persist those parameters in a physical table inside of your data warehouse, it could just be a table in memory in the Power App.
Absolutely. I think we are brainstorming and coming to different options to do this kind of thing. Yeah, very interesting.
For sure. Really, really good suggestion. Yeah, parameterized. And obviously, one of the things you could also do, you could also theoretically parameterize those extra API features that I was mentioning, right? Exactly. You could say, well, I want the temperature value to be 5 instead of 8 to get a more or less biased result. But I mean, maybe the temperature is a bad example, but there are different of those that you could tune for sure as well. Yeah.
John, another question. Copilot doesn't have any API like that OpenAI provide. Okay.
Unfortunately not. What you can do with one thing you can do is there's another component in the Power Platform that used to be called Power Virtual Agents. It's now been rebranded as Copilot Studio. And what that allows you to do is essentially to build your own Copilot, build your own chatbot in a low-code way. That would be the low-code way of creating your own enterprise chatbot, and that one would be able to set up with an API you could integrate with. If you wanted to go more pro code, you could do it with Azure OpenAI. So if you know how to code Python, you could set up a full sort of company-wide Copilot, right? Your own OpenAI implementation. But the Microsoft Copilot is unfortunately not available for us to interface with the API at this time.
Okay.
Other questions? Otherwise, I have a few other sort of interesting insights that I can share. So one thing that I think is pretty
For the
cool.
moment. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing I think is pretty cool is that, well, I think an underused feature in the Microsoft Power BI world is that you can embed Power BI reports inside of PowerPoint. So if you go into PowerPoint, you can add a Power BI tile to a page, and you can point that to a URL of a report. And you can have that URL be a report with embedded Power Apps. And those Power Apps will still work. So you can do write back to your data warehouse from inside PowerPoint if you wanted to. I think that's pretty cool, if you ask me. Not saying you should, but I'm saying that you could. And
Yeah.
the way I see this maybe be a more relevant use case would again be the financial report. Let's say that you have a financial report that management is looking at every month. Instead of taking screenshots of your Power BI report and sending it to them or putting it into your PowerPoint, let's say that management does not know or does not want to go into app.powerbi.com, who knows why, they need a PowerPoint. Instead of putting screenshots of your Power BI report in PowerPoint, you can embed the Power BI report, and you can have the comment Power app where the analyst is inputting comments and where management can maybe ask questions as well. You can put that into the PowerPoint as well. So you could have a one page, or you could have multiple pages if you want, but you can have a PowerPoint file that you never need to update, that you can send around via email to all the stakeholders in your company with an always updated report showing updated financial results and updated comments from all the stakeholders. I think that's a pretty cool integration.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I also just wanted to mention is possible is that if we integrate Power Automate, it's not the point of the demo in general. I just wanted to show that we can trigger Power Automate flows from inside of Power BI as well. I have a different session that I sometimes do at user groups about that, so we can take the full thing another time. But it's just really cool that we can trigger automate flows like we could do that with the button here. We can also do that with buttons in Power Apps, or we could schedule it to run every morning. And what I like to do with that is creating data-driven notifications. So Data Activator is coming with Fabric, right? And it can do some things. But what's really neat about Power Automate is that it has some really, really good connectors for Power BI. So I can actually run DAX queries against my data set. So what that means is that, I'm not sure why this is not working, but essentially every morning I could have a Power Automate flow run and say, okay, create a table of all the values in my data set that exceed 20 million in sales or goes below 500 items in my stock or some kind of threshold, and then send me a notification if with that table, right? And I can have that delivered to Slack or to Teams or to all kinds of stuff. So today I showed you mostly how we can integrate Power App extension to Power BI and Fabric, but really Power Automate also has a lot of cool extensions that I think you would all gain a lot of cool use cases for if you look into it.
Very interesting indeed, John. And this integration is really cool, and even an extension of the existing Power BI comments that we can already use, right? But this way, not only to store the comments there, you actually create a repository where you can store the comments, and you've shown two examples with the Dataverse or with directly with the warehouse, which is more newer. So it's very interesting.
For sure. And I just again wanted to highlight that this one up here, if you're not storing sensitive data, you could build this one using a SharePoint list, and it would cost you 0 in license fees. This app with the SharePoint integration, if you don't have any sensitive data, no license cost. The other ones, custom connectors and SQL connectors, as well as Dataverse, they require a premium connector. This one requires a premium connector because of the Power Automate flow using a SQL connector. So that was just to make sure that license-wise, that you know that Power Apps using SharePoint are generally free, and Power Apps using custom connectors and SQL connectors generally require a premium license per user.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, there is a final comment asking
Yeah.
if you maybe you have some GitHub or like a blog or something if you want to share in the comments or in end slides just for everyone to have your contacts and follow also your content. Yeah.
I actually do have. I'll put the link to GitHub in the chat as well. I have not created the folder for today's presentation yet, so maybe check back later today or tomorrow, and I'll make sure to upload the material from today. And otherwise, feel free to find me on LinkedIn if you're curious and have any questions about the integrations. I do quite a bit of blogging in there and have a lot of topics about syncing Dataverse data to Fabric, doing all kinds of stuff with the integration between Fabric and the Power Platform, also besides the stuff that I've shown today. So it would be a pleasure to connect with you guys, and for sure check out my GitHub for the material from today. I saw
Yeah.
there was a last question in the chat. Is that true?
Yeah, from Sambiento, from Marco, if all the users need to have the premium licenses or just develop, well, it depends on the connectors in the app, right?
Yeah, good question, but unfortunately it is all the end users. So the end users will need their own license. Actually the developer is the only one who doesn't. You can edit your Power App and use premium connectors as a developer without having a premium license. But as soon as you try to play the app or open it inside of Power BI, it will tell you that you don't have the required license. So all end users will need licenses if you're using, only if you're using premium connectors. But that is unfortunately how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and a final one, if we can, from Sonia, can we deploy this kind of apps directly in the web?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can, but it will not avoid the license question. So if you embed a Power BI report with a Power App on a website, or you can also just embed a Power App directly. If it was just a standalone Power App, we build a lot of those as well. They're not always inside of Power BI, but you will still have to log in with Microsoft credentials associated with the proper licensing to access the app on the web. But it's definitely possible, Sonia. Good question.
Okay, so I think we are right on time as it's maybe time for lunch for some of you. Some of you guys will still work a little bit and maybe have a lunch later. As you are in Copenhagen, I think it is 1 hour later, John. Right now it's 13.
1
right
o'clock.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
So it was really a pleasure to have you and sharing these use cases, John. We hope to see you soon. Thanks for coming
You
to
too.
our user group. And guys, keep tuned for John's content. It was really interesting. And see you soon at the next meetup. Thanks, John.
Thank you,
for
John.
everyone.
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.